Good afternoon and welcome to the Development Control and Regulatory Board, which is taking place in Spark and Hoe Committee Room at County Hall, Glenfield. Though some officers will be joining online via Microsoft Teams, this is also a public meeting and is being broadcast to the public via YouTube. I would ask all those members and officers in the council chamber raise their hands if they wish to speak, and then those joining online use the Microsoft Teams raised hand function. So for everybody that wanted to speak in the room, we speak into the microphone. Agenda item number 1 then is minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of September 2021. Can we confirm these as read and signed? Thank you. Anyone against? No. Okay, item 2, I've not received any questions from members of the public. Item 3, I've not received any questions from members either. Item 4, there are no urgent items. Item 5 is declarations of interest. Saying that it is noted that all members who are also members of parish, town, district or liaison committees will have a personal interest in those applications which relate to areas covered by those authorities. Are there any further declarations of interest? Mr. Bannister.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. On agenda item 8, the delegated decisions, and I appreciate this is decisions already been made.
Yeah, sure.
So somewhat academic, but I have a personal interest because one of those decisions relates to Welland House, and a close family member of mine lives in that complex. So I just want to make that clear. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Crossman, no, okay. Okay, thank you. Item 6 then, petitions. I haven't received any petitions under Standing Order 35. Item 7 is the application by Mick George Limited to continue aggregate bagging at Husbands Bosworth Quarry, Welford Road, Husbands Bosworth. Nick Bowden's going to present this report. So Nick, are you able to present the report now, please? Nick?
Yes, ready when you are, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, well, if you'd present the report then, please, I'd appreciate it.
Many thanks. Firstly, as members may be aware, this application sits alongside a related larger planning application, reference 21/063/03, which is Environmental Impact Assessment Planning Application seeking permission to extend sand and gravel operations largely towards the eastern side of the quarry. This application was, at the time of the DCRB report, subject to a Regulation 25 information request. The response to this information request has since been received and is now out for consultation period for the period of 30 days. The bagging plant, the subject of this planning application, is included within this wider planning application. Further, since the drafting of the report, one additional representation has been received from a nearby resident, which expresses concern about the amount of transported material and HGV movements through the village of Welford to the south, which is in Northamptonshire. Husbands Bosworth Quarry was first granted planning permission for sand and gravel extraction in the 1950s. It's an extensive history for this use and associated uses over the intervening period. Significant areas of the quarry have been restored and backfilled, which has involved the importation of inert waste. Various ancillary operations have been granted planning permission at the quarry during its lifespan. Most notably, these include washing, processing and bagging of material from the quarry. Extraction operations at the wider quarry ceased in 2019, Inert waste disposal at the site has continued during this time in order to facilitate its restoration, and many elements of the site have been restored or are in the process of being restored. The council has recently agreed an extension of time for the restoration of one part of the quarry. Other elements are overdue for restoration, however these have been delayed by legal issues that are in the process of being resolved. The historical extent of extraction is shown on this slide, with areas having been subject to extraction and restoration broadly indicated in yellow and those which are partially extracted indicated in blue. The site is located immediately to the south of the village of Husbands Bosworth and is broadly focused around the fluvial deposits associated with the River Welland. The current course of the river is located to the east of the quarry. The site is surrounded by fields with sporadic commercial uses and villages beyond. A number of listed buildings, along with Husbands Bosworth Conservation Area, exist to the north of the site. The application seeks permission to continue operating the bagging plant. This incorporates the retention of the existing building and associated plants and equipment. The existing building comprises a barn-like structure with dimensions of around 12 by 15 metres, with a height to eaves of about 5 metres. The building is surrounded by open storage of pallets, material for the bagging operation, and is set largely on crushed and compacted gravel and hardcore. The use of the site itself comprises the importation, processing and export of around 1,200 tonnes of material per week. Although not set out as part of this application documents, this is estimated to equate to up to 60 trips per day, that is 30 in, 30 out. The bagging plant, subject to this application, was originally approved under the remit of a planning permission granted in May 2000. A variation on the restriction of permitted development rights was allowed by prior approval in July 2005. The restrictions placed upon this building and use were that it only used for the processing of minerals from Husbands Bosworth Quarry, and then it be removed within 12 months of the cessation of quarrying operations. As mentioned, quarrying operations ceased on or around December 2019, and the building and surrounding site should have been removed and the area restored in accordance with the scheme of restoration. The building continues to be used and no restoration scheme has been submitted or implemented. The building and plant site continues to be used for the importation, washing and bagging of sand and gravel material, and notwithstanding the overdue timescales for removal and restoration, the importation of material was also not allowed for under the terms of the original permission. The source of this material has not been supplied by the applicant and remains unknown. For some context, the building and site can be seen here. The site forms part of a small part of the wider quarrying operations. Graph looking north from the parking and plant area to the remainder of the quarry and landfilling site.
Nick, you seem to have stopped halfway or part way or whatever. Are you there, Nick? Yes. Hello, Nick. Do you want to take over, Oliver, please?
Hi, Nick. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to hear you, so I'm just going to carry on for the remainder of the presentation. Ewan, is it okay if you take control from slide 6, please?
I may need to just upload it again. Just hold on a second.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ewan. Hopefully, Nick will return to help answer any questions that we might have, but I'll carry on from slide 6. So here, for some context, the building and the site can be seen. The site forms a small part of the wider quarrying operations and is located towards the north of the main haul road into the site. So if we move on to the next slide. The building and associated operations can be seen in this photograph, looking north from the parking and plant area towards the remainder of the quarry and landfilling site. Next slide, please. This photo is taken from near a cluster of porter's cabin office and administration buildings. And this one is taken from the haul road looking into the bagging plant site. Next slide. Okay, and this photo shows the main entrance of the quarry site on Welford Road with the access centre right and the village of Husbands Bosworth in the background. So the application site is identified as open countryside within the Harborough local plan and forms part of an allocated site for sand and gravel extraction under policy M2 of the Leicestershire Minerals and Waste Plan. The use of the site as a bagging facility to process minerals is capable of being acceptable, subject to compliance with policy M13, which states that planning permission for ancillary industrial development within or in close proximity to mineral sites will be granted. This, however, is on the proviso that it is demonstrated that there is a close association with the mineral site and there are environmental benefits in providing a close link with the extraction site. In this instance, the quarry is no longer in operation, albeit that this may be a temporary situation. The material processed at the bagging plant is therefore wholly imported material. The importation of material conflicts with both the terms of the original approval and policy M13 of the Minerals and Waste Plan. The bagging plant, therefore, does not benefit from any co-location factors and represents a form of industrial development in the open countryside, which should already have ceased and the site been restored. The application has also attracted an objection from the Highway Authority due to insufficient information being provided to demonstrate the operation of this site would not be detrimental to highway safety. Accordingly, the application is recommended for refusal on these grounds and as detailed in Appendix A of the report. Thanks, and that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Oliver. We've got a speaker this afternoon speaking on behalf of the applicant. It's Mr. Goff. Mr. Goff, if you'd like to take a seat over there. I've allowed you the full 5 minutes. Ewan will time you, and if you go over the 5, he'll tell you to stop talking. Okay, let's just start when you're ready then, please.
Okay. Chair, members of the committee. Planning permission is being sought for the temporary use of the aggregate bagging plant at Husbands Bosworth Quarry. It is envisaged this time would allow sufficient period for a separate all-encompassing planning application for an extension of the quarry to be determined by your authority. That application includes an eastern extension to the quarry workings in line with your development plan policy M2. That application also includes the continued use of the aggregate bagging plant, which has been in existence for nearly 2 decades. Your Highways Department sought additional information on what they referred to as increased use of the existing quarry access point, although in fact it is simply a continued use. Be that as it may, the company commissioned and submitted a comprehensive transport assessment, which was only received by ourselves on the 12th of October and was submitted as part of this application 3 days later. From reading your officer report to committee, there is no reference whatsoever to this document, with no indication that it has even been passed on to your own highways engineers. That report, which additionally deals with all HGV traffic related to the future Husbands Bosworth Quarry, includes detailed topographic survey of the junction, an up-to-date automatic traffic count along the A5199, a summary of personal injury accidents over the last 5 years. The report confirms there are no highway safety issues, there are no highway capacity issues. The report concludes that the development proposals are in full accordance with the transport policy test as set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. It is unclear, however, whether this report has ever been passed on to your highways engineers for comment in respect of this current application. Paragraph 59 of the officer report states that highways information has not been forthcoming from the applicant. This statement is regrettably incorrect. Mick George Limited has only taken over the site from Tarmac earlier this year, and as such the company is unable to comment on historic activities at the site. I would, however, point out that Tarmac have continued to bring material to an adjacent landfill site, which has raised a number of issues with local residents. An extension of time has now been granted for the existing quarry by your authority, which will allow mineral left behind by Tarmac to now be processed on site. The new processing plant is currently being commissioned. Such material can then be utilised within the established bagging plant, thereby providing the required compliance with policy M13, in that there is a tangible and close link with the extraction site. The recommendation to you suggests the proposal is harmful to the appearance of the landscape, but your own landscape officer has no objection. The recommendation in part relates to the fact minerals were to be imported to the bagging plant. However, by virtue of the recent consent to allow on-site aggregate to once again be produced for an interim period, this mineral can now be used in a sustainable manner within the bagging plant. This will ensure vital materials for the construction industry can be supplied for local projects. This in turn will assist the economic recovery out of COVID for the area, which based on the submitted highways assessment is not to the detriment of the local community. In light of the above, we respectfully request that the application to allow the aggregate bagging plant operations for a further limited period is approved. Chair, members of the committee, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goff. Has any members of the committee any questions for Mr. Goff? Michael.
Thank you, Chair. A little unclear in the middle of your speech there. Where is the aggregate coming from that's being bagged?
At this moment in time, it is being brought in from, it's being operated by a company called GRS. It's not being operated by Mick George. It's been coming from remote locations, and that's what's happened over the last decade or so.
That's not what the report says.
But that is the GRS import material to there is actually planning permission to import material. I believe the consent granted to Tarmac allowed material to be brought from the Mount Sorrel quarry to the site.
Leon.
Hi, I have two questions actually. How many?
Well, we're just commissioning a new plant at the moment. There'll probably be about between 10 and a dozen people on site.
Actually, I'm looking at the photograph. And actually, when I saw the slide, about the way actually, yeah, actually very, the two roads are coming together. It looks actually rather narrow and dangerous, but actually when I look actually at the junction between this road coming from the quarry with the A5199, it doesn't really look bad at all. Because that photograph has been taken actually with very high hedges, but if you look at it now, if you go there and you look at it now with the low hedges, actually it looks actually much significantly less dangerous. So this is my observation.
Is that something you can answer, Mr. Goff? I mean,
if we're talking about the junction, the junction, we commissioned a topographic survey of the junction, and what the consultants have done what they call a sweep path analysis to demonstrate the vehicles can access the site, and it's perfectly in line with County Council guidelines in terms of junction design. It was improved several years ago, we understand.
Okay, Les.
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of questions, if I may. One for the applicant, or a couple for the applicant, and a couple for the planning team, if I may. You said, sir, temporary.
Correct.
What is the definition of temporary? And secondly, you said that you're currently commissioning some new plant there. Do you have planning permission for that? And then, if I may, officers, the gentleman mentioned that he had submitted a transport report. So I'd like to understand the officer's position on that one, please. So thank you, Chair.
Sorry, could you repeat the first question?
You said temporary.
Temporary, right.
The definition of temporary. Second part was you mentioned new plant being commissioned. Do you have planning permission for that? And then the third one was for the officers. Yeah. Thank you.
The in terms of the application, it's very similar to the consent that's been granted for the continued use of the quarry to recover minerals. It's an interim consent to allow a larger planning consent or application to be determined. This is for an eastern extension to the quarry, which includes continued use of the bagging plant, establishment of a new processing plant, and the establishment of a ready-mix concrete plant on site as well. So it's using the aggregates from the site in a sustainable manner. So the consent would only be for a temporary period. I believe it's for a 2-year period until such time as the new application is fully determined by the application. In terms of the commissioning of the plant, this is the mineral processing plant. So the consent that was granted last September, October, I believe it might have been, for the continued use of the quarry allowed operations to continue. So Mick George have taken over the site. They've put in a brand new plant onto the site to process that mineral. That would be continued if we get planning permission for the extension, which is in the mineral local plan.
Okay, Mr. King.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just want to try and clarify some points really. So just stated that the site is actually operated by a company called GRS.
The bagging plant.
Bagging plant's operated by GRS.
That's correct. That's always been the case.
That's always been the case. Okay. So reading the report, what I understand is that the temporary importation permission that was given in, is it 98, for the importation of material from Mount Sorrel Quarry was 26,000 tonnes of material per annum. Now, according to the report, which I haven't heard you say is incorrect, currently you're importing, or the operator is importing 1,200 tonnes per week, which that means in the last 2 years, 125,000 tonnes of material has been imported against 52,000 that actually was allowed under the temporary consent that was given in 98.
Well, we can't comment anything before January this year.
Okay, but okay, so well, since January this year then, 1,200 tonnes a week.
No, it was up to 1,200. We were asked for a figure. What was the maximum figure? We said up to 1,200 tonnes.
All right, so now it's not 1,200 tonnes a week.
No, but what we're saying is now we're getting the plant commissioned, the mineral because Tarmac had closed their plant, they were unable to supply any aggregate direct to GRS.
So I'm a bit sort of confused as to how much material is actually being imported and then exported.
Well, we don't have those specific figures. We were asked what the maximum figure was, okay, not what the actual figures were.
Well, I'm okay. That's very. I think that's very unsatisfactory, to be honest, Chair. That we've got no clarity about how much is actually being imported or not from this site. We've got a vague figure of it might be up to 1,200 tonnes a week, but we don't actually seem to know how much is actually being imported or not, and then exported again. That's very unsatisfactory, to be honest. And then we've got a, in the report it says this site has been operating for 2 years without consent, and now the applicant's agent says that it hasn't been operating like that for 2 years. So I'm a bit confused. Has it or hasn't it, Chair? And I think I would be grateful if the officers could clarify the position for me. Thank you.
Anyone else? Les?
Sorry, Chair. I did have my three-part question, which was addressing the officers on the transport report that the gentleman mentioned.
Yes. Yeah, okay. If there's no more questions from Mr. Goff, thank you, Mr. Goff.
The transport statement was submitted on the 15th of October, and that's a copy of it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I understand that there's no comments from Mr. Payne, the local member. Is that right?
Yes, I have made Mr. Payne aware of the report, but he hasn't submitted any comments.
Okay. Right, we're open up to members now then, please. Anybody wishes to say anything, speak?
Chair, would you like us to answer?
Pardon?
Would you like us to respond?
Okay, Nick, thank you. Or was it Oliver?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'll pick up the questions in the first instance. Nick
Okay.
may want to fill in and add a little after me. And I think we have Nick Bowden back on the call as well, who might be able to pick things up if we do, provided there aren't any further technical difficulties. So on the first point, the highways assessment, I've had it clarified that we have received the transport report. It was passed on to highways and they responded highlighting a requirement for still more info. So there was still a matter of insufficient information in relation to the highways assessment. So that's the one that was submitted in October, I believe. And I understand that further information request from highways relates both to this application and the wider EIA application as well. In terms of the other question about the continuing operation of the GRS, the bagging plant, we undertake regular monitoring of the site. Mineral extraction at the site ceased. We haven't received formal notification of it, but on the basis of monitoring visits, it ceased around the end of 2019. That means there's not been any extraction on site, so the continued operation of the GRS bagging plant has relied on importation of material rather than on-site one aggregates from that point onwards. We don't have records of the quantity of material that's gone through the GRS bagging site, but we are aware that it has continued to operate on the basis of imported material. In terms of its operation, the planning permission that was referenced that allowed a limited amount of material to be brought onto site externally, 26,000 tonnes specifically from Mount Sorrel. That was a limited quantity of material that was allowed, and I understand that it was time limited as well. So both of those elements have passed, the quantity and the time, and that permission no longer stands. So the importation of material is an unauthorised activity. There were a few questions, so if I've missed anything or anybody wants to highlight something that I've not covered, please do let me know.
Okay. Right, open to members now. Mr. King.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the answer to my question.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask the officers in relation to the I think it's in paragraph 69 of the report. It talks about if the recommendation for refusal was approved by the committee, whether it would be appropriate to take enforcement action. Would that be enforcement action by the county council? And how long would you consider, how long would you expect, you know, if you know, would you give it before you actually took some action, or is it reliant on this wider application that you've referenced and the applicant's referenced as well? Thank you.
Okay, yes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so in terms of enforcement, it's quite common that where we're recommending a refusal on a retrospective application, we would also seek approval from the board to take action. That is a county council function, so it would be us taking action. In this case, because it's unusual, because we have a parallel planning application being considered, and there is the potential in this case that if the information is submitted and it's satisfactory, that the concerns could then be overcome by conditions. So particularly in relation to where the material has come from. So it's, you know, extracted from the site itself, and it's not going to be imported distances that could potentially address the sustainability arguments. The highway issues could potentially be overcome with, you know, routing conditions, controls over vehicle movements, those sorts of things. But at this stage, we just don't know, and there's no guarantee that other planning application will be approved. So this is why we're only recommending refusal. We do have delegated powers to take action, so we have that ability to not need to come back to DCRB if the situation was to become prolonged, if the other application is refused, or if it was to sort of drag on for quite a while. But at this stage, we think it's reasonable that we give the applicant the opportunity to address those concerns, and if permission is granted, then enforcement action may not be necessary.
Thank you, Nick. Michael.
Yeah, just briefly, it clearly says on page 9, the agreement to allow the bagging plant was also allowed subject to the building shall be removed from the site and the site restored within 12 months of the cessation of sand and gravel extraction. Yet the current applicant and the previous owner have both declined to give us a time of when the cessation took place. I find that astonishing. Previous owner should have stumped up and says we've not finished sometime in 2019, which clearly is the case because officers have been down there. I just think we're not being given the information we require to give a positive outcome to this. So I'm going to move the officer's recommendation for refusal.
Okay. Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much, Chair. So it's just a question for the officers out of curiosity more than anything else. Is there any practicable reason why the bagging operation couldn't be carried out at the source of the material? And it has to come to this point. But also, I'm happy to second the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for the question, and it's a very valid question. We don't know where the source of material is, though. There may be constraints. There may not be. It might be coming from a range of sites, some of which do have constraints for processing and bagging on site, some of which don't. But there isn't any details in the application or that have become apparent today about where the source of the material is.
Okay, Mr. Lovegrove.
Might be a minor point, but if this is refused, I think we've heard information this afternoon that they're currently exceeding the amount of the temporary importation tonnage per annum. So even if it's refused, but no action was taken because there may be another application coming, would that limitation of 26,000 tonnes be followed up and made sure that it was being adhered to? Thank you.
Nick, please.
There currently isn't any permission for the 26,000 tonnes, so any importation is unlawful, and that's why we would want to work with the applicant to resolve the other planning application to get certainty in terms of where we stand. But if that isn't resolved in a reasonable period of time, then we would certainly take enforcement action.
Okay, Mr. King.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So having listened very carefully to everything, I am going to be supporting the refusal of this application because there isn't any consent for importation to the site. We've got no clarity of where the material's coming from, and residents in the community are very concerned about the volume of HGV lorries going up and down in that area. And I think we need to stop this until we get matters rectified one way or the other. And so that's why I'm happy to support the recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. King, thank you. Mr. Les.
Thank you, Chair. I think very much, you know, members who know me well will know that, you know, it is always difficult for me to compromise any business. But I think we have a fundamental issue here. This is in breach of policy, and activities have no status in planning law as it sits today. And I would be concerned that temporary is 2 years, unspecified, but 2 years is quite a long time for temporary. So sadly, I have to agree with the officer's recommendation. I don't think we have any choice. What's the point of having policies if we don't follow them and enforce them? So, sorry, Chair.
Yeah, okay, thank you. If there is no more speakers' questions or anything, it's been moved by Michael Charlesworth and seconded by Mr. Allen that we refuse this application. So if we move to the vote now, then all in favour of the proposition to refuse the application? I think that's unanimous, but I will say anyone against that. Okay. Thank you very much. Then the application is refused. Moving on then to item number 8 on the agenda is delegated decisions issued between the 1st of July and the 30th of September. This is a receive a note report, but obviously if there are any questions, please ask now. No, it doesn't look like there is. Moving on to item 9 then, as I said previously, that there are no urgent items. Item 10 is dates of future meetings. Well, those have been published, so it takes us right up till December 2022. Item 11 is Chairman's announcement. The only announcement I have is to say thank you very much for obviously coming this afternoon, and I'll close the meeting at that. Okay.